And we're on.
We are on.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Betsy and Lisa and whoever else might be logging on, joining on. Please say good morning, say hello in the chat. And if you have any questions this morning, anything you've been ruminating on, please let us know. But welcome. It is 10:01 a.m. where I am, and we are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil, our weekly show here where we talk about all kinds of things. We answer your questions and we talk about God and the church, and we've talked about the Bible. We've talked about the sacraments in the last few weeks, all sorts of good stuff.
These are a few of my favorite things.
But I'm Kira Austin Young. I'm the priest in charge of St. Anne's in Nashville.
And I'm Philip DeVaul, rector of Church of the Redeemer in Cincinnati, Ohio. And at the beginning, when you were like saying hi to people and you were like, welcome to, I thought you were going to say, welcome to Are You There, God? And you were like, welcome to Betsy. And I was like, that's not the name of our show, but you made a good call by prioritizing people. People first. Morning, Leslie. Good morning, Lisa and Betsy. And good morning, Kira. It is a joy, as always, and a privilege to get to talk to you once a week about all the kinds of nerdy stuff that we care about.
Yeah. So hey, Phil, like, how's your Lent going? We're like a couple weeks into Lent now. Like, how's it going?
I just threw up in my mouth when you said that. Okay, so I have the hardest time confining my religious experience to the liturgical calendar.
That's fair. Yeah.
In terms of Lent, in the language that people tend to use, I didn't give anything up.
Mm-hmm.
No, I have a hard time giving things up for Lent. Not because I'm not capable of it, just because I get like, I'm not going to do that. I've done it many times in the past. It almost always seems like I'm trying to prove something more than in any kind of devotion to our Lord, who I'm a big fan of, as you know. I sort of stan Jesus.
Jesus stan.
But this year, especially, I made the joke last year that for Lent I gave up Eucharist and hugging.
Yeah, for real.
And this Lent it looks like a repeat performance. So I feel as if we are depriving ourselves in so many ways that I'm just not interested in adding to the list. But that being said, you didn't ask if I was giving up anything. You asked how my Lent was going.
It did. Yeah.
There's this really cool thing that we're doing at Redeemer where there's these devotionals that are coming out on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays that are writings of Howard Thurman.
Oh, nice.
And connecting them to the lectionary reading from the previous week. So you'll get like the collect of this past Sunday, and then the gospel passage from this past Sunday, and then one of his writings. And we do that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday throughout Lent. And then every other week we have on a Sunday, we have like a get together on Zoom to talk about how that's going for us. And that's it. So it's really low key, but it's really like beautiful. And I've been really appreciative of that. That's been really cool. And we just started up our Lenten series on last Wednesday, which is connected to Becoming Beloved Community. We've got some outside teachers that are coming in to talk to us about sort of like how we connect contemplative spirituality with racial justice and action, and really cool work, which I'm excited about. But a lot of it's about naming some of our own stuff, which is what Lent's all about, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I'm doing, I guess. I don't know if that answered this better. Maybe we're starting up Church Outside this Sunday.
Cool. Great.
I'm happy. What about you? How's it going? How's Lent?
Yeah, it's okay. I think last year was so hard and weird because we had the tornado right in the beginning of Lent for us last year. And then obviously the pandemic. And so like almost from the get-go, Lent for me last year was just like, welp,
Right. Everything is terrible.
Yeah. So I did kind of want to be a little bit more intentional this year. And I feel like every Advent and Lent, I sort of like recommit to the daily office. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things that like I do throughout the year, but it always kind of, I'll skip, I've got a meeting this morning or whatever, and I kind of end up not doing it. So to really like sit down, definitely say morning prayer. I've got like a book of kind of readings, daily readings that I do then kind of afterwards. So that's sort of my like spiritual practice and grounding. And then I'm doing a little bit of fasting, but not like for the whole, not like all 40 days.
Sure.
I'm really kind of trying to observe the Fridays and like the holy days, Ash Wednesday of Lent, and particularly not eat meat or sweets or alcohol on those kind of holier days.
Sure.
In some ways I feel like it has helped me with the time thing.
Oh yeah, like so that not every day bleeds into the other in a nightmare of endless days. Yeah.
Yeah, of that kind of like, okay, today is Friday. Like there are leftovers from yesterday, but I can't eat them because they have chicken in them or whatever. And just kind of like that mental thing of like it's Friday and it's like it's a particularly penitential day.
Yeah.
And,
so Friday's normally my day off, so I wouldn't dare treat it penitentially.
I know that's one of the struggles, right? Is like same.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. But I mean, it's like you go into that mindset of like, well, Jesus died for you. The least you could do is give up meat on Fridays. I don't really think like that. I was going to ask you about I mean, I've always like, it's interesting when people talk about giving something up for 40 days and and that's fine, except that the Sundays in Lent aren't part of the count of 40 days. Right. I don't know if everybody, so here's some church nerdiness for y'all. Lent isn't 40 days long.
It's longer.
It's longer. It's 40 days plus Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about the 40 days of Lent, we're not talking about Sunday. Now that's interesting because our liturgy observes Lent on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we don't say Alleluia. We don't, we wear purple. We start with the penitential order, things like that. But the idea is we still participate in the feast. And that Sunday is every Sunday is in some ways a feast day.
And every Sunday is in some ways like a little Easter.
A little resurrection. Resurrection. So, like I was taught by one of my mentors who's, and we're going to talk a little bit more about like high church, low church, Anglo-Catholic evangelical stuff. I was taught by one of my mentors who's an Anglo-Catholic, like, you don't deprive yourself on Sundays. And I was like, huh? And he's like, yeah, no, Sundays don't count. If you gave up chocolate for Lent, eat chocolate on Sundays. And I thought that was cheating.
Yeah.
But he pointed, it's not only is it not cheating, he pointed something out. If you actually do the thing that you gave up every Sunday, it changes your attitude about it. It stops being about how long can I last? And it starts focusing on throughout the week, I'm doing this thing, but each Sunday marks a new week and is a different time. And so it stops being, oh, I only made it 20 some days or whatever. And it gets you out of that mindset of like, what am I trying to like? I mean, I part of my issue with Lenten observances is I end up using them as opportunities to improve myself as a person.
Yes.
And I just find self-improvement to be utterly obnoxious.
Right. I think that's a very real temptation for all of us.
Every time. I have such immense food issues. And like it's such a constant part of my waking life are my issues with food. And so I always make Lent about food.
Mm-hmm.
And then it inevitably becomes about the number on the scale.
Yeah.
So I correlate my devotion to our Lord and Savior to a number. That's not healthy. It's super American, but it's not healthy.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that's got to be I've got to like break free of. So I got to work. I mean, that's why I like Lent, like the way you described it, like in the Catholic faith, where it's like, yeah, we don't do meat on Fridays. Like that doesn't mean like, I mean, dude, you can eat an Oreo if you want, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, although I guess no sweets too, you said, but like you could have French fries or whatever. But like the idea of like treating it like a fast on a day depriving yourself of something for a day to remember something, rather than like, how long can I make it? How good can I be at being this person? You know?
Yeah. And like a friend of mine, started off Lent and said like, I'm going to do a vegetarian Lent. And it wasn't going well for her. Like she was just
Right.
having trouble focusing. It was
Right.
messing with like kind of her blood sugar and some of
Yeah.
her other kind of like pre-existing health issues. Like it wasn't working for her and her body and like the things that she needed to do. And like she bailed on it. And I think that's right. Like that's what she should have done. And I think more and more I approach Lent of sort of like, what does this Lent have to teach me? And like, am I open to what this season is trying to teach me, rather than like that very, very human, very like, I've had this impulse of like, what am I going to get out of this Lent? Like, how am I going to exit this Lent as like a better person or like a better Christian? And I think really reminding ourselves that like Jesus already did the work for us,
right,
is so important for our kind of like American Protestant work ethic, where we think we can just like will ourselves into being a better person. And so that has really like, I think for my first several years as a priest, stuff would happen during Lent because it's in a weird season where like there would be an ice storm and we couldn't have our weekly like Lenten programming or whatever. Like, and I would get so worked up about it and I'd be like, oh, this Lent is ruined, and like it's not about the programming. It's not about the Bible study. It's not about like what you're giving up or what you're taking on. It's about like that we are human and we are not God, and God is God, and God has already saved us. Done. It's the work is done.
I'm just becoming more and more of a vigilante against the notion that like God is interested in you becoming a better person.
Yeah.
I just like people like, it's a common sort of like idea that like, well, being religious is supposed to like, or being, I just want to be a better person and this will help me be a better person. I don't even know what that, like, I guess I'm at the point where I'm just like, I don't even know what you mean anymore. Like, I'm not mad. I just don't understand. Like, better than what?
Or like a better person according to whom?
Right. According to God, I guess. But even then, like your definition of God, but then like better than what? Well, then I was the day before. So then you're just constantly in a state of thinking you could be better. That sounds awful. Like, it just sounds awful to me that we're supposed, and I do it. It doesn't just sound awful. It feels awful because I do it. Like the constant state of thinking I could be better than I am. I'm in it right now. And it sucks. It's dumb. And the degree to which I'm able to pull out of that and just love myself and my neighbor, right? It's not just about like, ooh, feel good with yourself. Like, it's about like reorienting yourself around love.
Yeah.
Loving yourself, loving your neighbor, loving God, like just reorienting yourself. And people will try to trap you in that, but doesn't that just mean becoming like better at it? And I'm like, I mean, I to the degree that like, do you practice the piano so you can get to a certain point? But practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes practice.
Yeah.
Like, it's a practice.
I had a swimming coach that would say perfect practice makes perfect.
Ooh.
It isn't practice that makes perfect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect. And that was in relationship to like our technique and everything. Sure, like just the act of practicing doesn't get you anywhere unless you are attentive in that practicing.
Right. I'm highly aware that when Jesus shows up in our scriptures, that the people that he's the angriest with are, of course, people in religious authority. But the thing that he's angry about quite often is that they put burdens on people that people cannot bear.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that giving something up for Lent is a burden that people can't bear. That's not my point. I think the burden that people can't bear is the ideology that they start from a position that they're worthless, and then if they act right, they could be worthy. I think that's a burden that no one can bear.
Yeah, and I think for me, the burden that I don't want to put on anybody as a cleric or as, a spiritual leader in my community or whatever, is saying that there's one right way to do Lent, or there's
Right.
one right way to
Right.
observe this liturgical season.
Right.
I mean, I know that's certainly not true for me. And one of the other kind of push-pull dynamics that I've had to figure out as a clergy person is like, how do I observe a liturgical season or observe a practice or observe a fast while also leading people through that?
Yep.
And because when I was a layperson, like I would do pretty strict fasts on Ash Wednesday, on Good Friday, on some of the holier days of our liturgical year.
Yeah.
And when I became a clergy person, I was doing 3 services on Ash Wednesday.
Right.
And if I didn't eat something, I would
totally
pass out. I was no good to anybody if I was.
I remember literally an Ash Wednesday where I was going to give up all sorts of food for Lent, like go clean or something. I don't remember what it was. This is just a few years ago. It's been since I was in Cincinnati, and I had 3 services that day, and got done, and it was like 8 o'clock or something, or 9 o'clock or whatever time it was. Hadn't eaten all day, had fasted, and everything was closed. And I drove to McDonald's and got McDonald's, and had McDonald's on the way home. And I was like, well, that's how you start your Lent, people.
You're like, I couldn't even make it one day, and then you beat yourself up, and it's just this whole cycle of like nothing good. Nothing.
Yeah, there's just the whole idea of shaming, like building shame into this stuff. We shame ourselves so strongly, and it's tough. We're not getting any chatter on the side. We're either incredibly captivating or incredibly boring.
But I'd love to hear from you all. Like, how is your Lent going?
How's Lent going, people?
Maybe you haven't picked a practice yet, or you're just kind of giving up Lent for Lent, or we've all I do feel like our lives during the pandemic are all so like small, and that it's hard to kind of pare it down even more sometimes.
Right. Yep.
Like I kind of my husband even said to me kind of at one point, he was like, there are so few places for us to like find joy right now. Like, why would you want to like give one of those things up?
And yes. And it just made me laugh. I was thinking, because I remember one time someone said like, I'm giving up cussing for Lent. And I was just like, I'm giving up Lent for cussing. So, Lisa Grubbs has some pretty good questions here, or one question and then a comment. But the question, have you ever done a Lent that was really great? Here's my first response. I've had amazing Lents. It's just that none of them were great because of my practice. That's the thing that I figured out. I love Lent. Oh, I love the season. I love the purple. I love the music. I love I love the worship. I love the focus on penitence. I love the slowing down. I love the confrontation of things. And there have been disciplines within that. I've had moments, right, that are worth it. I love some of the Lenten series that we've done right now at Redeemer. For the last couple of years, we've been focusing on becoming beloved community throughout Lent. I've loved it. I mean, Kira, we did this thing when we were a couple of years ago when we introduced Becoming Beloved Community, where I did a whole Sunday where I basically just taught the biblical imperative for racial justice, and both in Old and New Testaments. And I was looking at like of course, like, the prophets, but then also like Paul's writings in Galatians and Romans and First Corinthians and Ephesians, and understanding sort of like the break. Like all of a sudden, it dawned on me how much of our New Testament writings are focused on how to bring together communities from different backgrounds, and that have historically been at enmity with one another and have had differences in power structure and power dynamics. That's like what Paul is dealing with in Romans and Galatians and in First Corinthians. And like, he's dealing with that specific issue. And in Ephesians is all about that. That Jesus in his life and death and resurrection breaks down the walls that separate us and enables those who are far off and those who are near can hear the proclamation of peace and can be brought together by Jesus. He's talking of, and he talks about those of the uncircumcision and those of the circumcision. He's talking about, diverse and very different cultures being brought together. and creating, and by the way, in practical ways, how do we create communities? I learned all that at Lent, right?
Yeah.
Not from reading a book other than the Bible and being forced to like think about it. And in Revelation, when you think about the picture around the throne room, ever the heavenly throne, where it's people of all ages, races, and nations bow before, like all of a sudden it all starts to come together. I learned that at Lent. So I love Lent. Last year we were doing a sermon series, not us preaching, but on Wednesdays we were listening to recordings and of Martin Luther King Jr.'s sermons.
Ooh.
Oh man, what an awesome Lenten practice. I loved it. And this year we're doing this Howard Thurman thing. Oh my God, it's just like blowing my mind. So to be clear, I love Lent and I love Lenten practices. I realized that my baggage is that when people ask about Lent, they're often asking about what you're giving up and what kind of a person you're going to be when it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to commit to you all is that I'm going to be the same crappy person on Easter that I was on Ash Wednesday. I want to make that commitment to you, but I might during these 40 days have my eyes opened to love and grace a little bit more fully and be a little bit more honest in different areas of my life about places that I need God's help. And that I like, right? I also did a practice once where I was trying to watch 40 Spike Lee movies in 40 days.
Whoa.
Yes. That's a lot of time, it turns out.
It is.
I have a wife and children and a dog and a full-time job and a house. So it turns out, so I did pull off 20 movies in 40 days. And I saw 20, and I was going in chronological order. But I mean, here's the thing, Lisa, right? Like I like Lent as much as I like Lent and Advent as well. Lisa says you should add things instead of giving up things. I don't want to add things either. Holy smokes, my life. Like, where you want to add, if you want to add 4 hours to my day. But I hear you. I have that, like, I think these practices that we do as clerics, where we have these different Lenten series, like shifts my perspective. And I always love what I learn alongside everyone else during Lent. So I think the adding for me as a priest is adding these classes or these practices for the whole church. And I just make a point of also participating in them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just for them, it's for me.
Right.
Does that make sense? Anyway, that's me. What about you? You ever done a Lent that was great?
I'm thinking of sort of two Lents. One as a lay person and one as a clergy person. And my one as a lay person was in my campus ministry group at Rice University. And we had a few years where we had members of our group who were being baptized at the Easter Vigil. And because it was a relatively small campus ministry, I mean, we kind of walked through, it felt like what I imagined the early church Lent would feel like. Like, yeah. We helped this person prepare for their baptism. We, and then to like, adult baptisms or what adult baptisms are very powerful to me. And just to kind of like help this person prepare, who was a friend of ours, like we were close, and then to then share the Eucharistic meal with them, like after that, was just immensely powerful. And we always did, like, our campus ministry Easter Vigil was like a late night Easter Vigil. Like, so it just felt like we were gathering like in the catacombs to like observe this this vigil, and that was just those were really powerful Lents as that preparation for baptism of one of our own. And then a few years ago, I did a like Lenten series with my church at the time on like death. And we talked about wills and living wills and all of like the kind of medical legal stuff and all the sort of like spiritual.
We did that a couple years ago too. I love that.
Like a memento mori Lent. It was a congregation which at the time, as a lot of Episcopalian congregations are, it was mostly older people. And a lot of them said, I was surprised. I was like a little, like doing this felt a little risky for me. And I was surprised at how much people engaged with it and like really wanted to have these conversations, and kind of came to the group and would sort of say like, I've been trying to have these conversations with my children and they don't want to hear about it. Like they don't want to think about me dying, but like I want to talk about what I want, either at the end of life or at my funeral, or what kind of medical interventions I would be comfortable with or what I wouldn't be comfortable with.
You want to talk about those things.
Yeah, like and they wanted to talk about them, and their kids were kind of like, not right now.
Yeah.
Which is understandable, but it was a safe place to kind of have those conversations and to talk about that in meaningful ways. And I just kind of told them like, look, it makes it so much easier on everyone involved if you have a plan or you've expressed your wishes in some way. Because, I don't know how many times I've been kind of planning a funeral with the family and I've said, are there any hymns or Bible passages that were particularly meaningful to this person? And it's
like,
time, right? It's a stressful time. And so even if there are, people can't think of them in the moment. And, but for like, I just love when I got like this whole file of stuff from a parishioner that was like, this is the funeral home. Like, this is the hymns that we want at my funeral. Like I want Eucharistic prayer B, or, down to like the little.
We have, and I didn't start this. It was started long before I got here. We have files on half of our parishioners like that.
Yeah.
When someone dies, the first thing we do is check their file to see if they have it, because we have everything you just said. What hymns, which Eucharistic prayer, what preferences do you have around readers if you have them, like all of that is present. Funeral home, we have all that information for a lot of our parishioners. And one of our previous pastoral care associates like just put that into place, and we even have a template. And I'll tell you what, and I used it like 2.5 years ago now, I guess it was 2.5 years ago. My godmother was dying of brain cancer, and I went out to California and got to spend some time with her, and we spent like a day together, like hanging out. And I was like, I'm coming back tomorrow. And she was like, okay. And I came back the next day and I was like, so I'm going to ask you something, and you can say no, but I hope you don't. Mm-hmm. She's like, what? And I was like, I'd like to work on your funeral now. And she just like burst into tears and then was like, okay. And I pulled out the template that this guy at this church before me had. And I literally just walked through the service and was able to plan her funeral, in which her children were like, who are like we call each other god brother and god sister. Like I grew up with these guys as my godmother. And they were just like, they were just so comforted by the fact that this was done already. When she died, all we had to do was
put it into place.
Right. And
plug and play, man.
Yeah. And that's really helpful. It really is so helpful. So it's, I totally agree with you. And I've got my funeral plans written out somewhere. I don't know. I mean, I haven't done we haven't done as a last will, which we need to do. We also haven't like decided who our kids would go to, because I don't like anybody enough to give my kids to them. I guess I don't know. I'm sending them all to Kira's house. She's going to be like, whoa, that like in those movies where like, it's somebody that was like, this was not at all what I had thought. Right. One day, Kira and Michael open the door and there's just 3 kids and they're like, we belong to you now, buddy. So, Lisa, you should totally do it. Betsy's done it. Betsy actually came to the church. I don't think I'm breaking any rules telling this, Betsy. We have a columbarium.
Yeah.
Betsy and I like walked around the columbarium looking at the different open spaces. And she's like, where will I be? And it was so great. It's of genuinely, people are surprised by how uplifting it actually is.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't want to skip over Lisa's point that she made earlier, that there was last year she gave away 40 things a day, purge and pray. Man, I would love that.
Yeah, I did I did 1 year where I didn't buy any, like the goal of the Lenten practice was to not buy anything, extra, like obviously food or gas or like medicine, that stuff was included, but no like clothes or home furnishings or kind of like extra stuff.
Right.
For the period during Lent. And I think I maybe broke it a few times, but it was very good at drawing my attention to how often I used consumption to kind of soothe myself.
Yes.
And I really think that's the goal of any kind of Lenten practice, is just to like ask you to pay attention. Like, what are you using this thing that you've given up, or this thing that you're paying attention to? Like, what are you using it for? And what might be a better way of using that thing instead? Because I think it's so common for us as Americans, particularly probably of a certain class level, to kind of surround ourselves with stuff in a way that like is probably more damaging than like us eating sweets or whatever. But like, it's so much easier to kind of say like, oh, I'm not eating sweets, it's Lent.
Right. But look at all the things that just showed up on my doorstep from Amazon.
Right.
But I clicked a button. The next day, these things showed up. And
I did give up Amazon last year.
How'd that go?
So I didn't give up Amazon Prime like for watching stuff, but I did give up like ordering stuff from Amazon. And again, it kind of made me aware of how often I'm just like, click. And what that means in terms of like
not supporting local businesses,
my own kind of impatience.
I could have it.
Even if I ordered something from another website and the shipping was slower than like the next day or 2 days or whatever, I was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah, what is the point even? I might have to get in my car and drive 10 minutes to something that they might have. Ugh.
Yeah.
It is true. Yeah, I think if I could give up Amazon Prime when it comes to shipping. I'm not comfortable with giving up Amazon Prime when it comes to all of the watching of the TV. Yeah, that's actually where they've got me. It's not so much the anymore. I actually try to buy fewer and fewer things on Amazon and trying to redirect my consumption to local and small businesses when possible. Like even like this always makes people laugh because like, but like, you know, the Amazon does like groceries now through Whole Foods, and you can Amazon Fresh or whatever, and they give you these big bags that are like free, like it's crazy. And I'm just like, I just use Kroger, and they're like, well, that's just another big company, and I'm like, yeah, but it's Cincinnati, it's local. Like when I shop Kroger, I am supporting local business. I don't care what anyone says. Like people go like, oh, it's a big corporation. It's a big corporation in Cincinnati that employs a lot of my parishioners. You're darn right I'm using them. I'm going to go to Kroger and I'm going to buy Procter & Gamble products because I want to support local business. But it is crazy, the level we consume. And you know what? You're right. Like, I don't know. I get grumpy about Lenten. It's so funny because I've listed all these things where Lenten practice has been important to me. But I think it is the marathon of giving something up, like trying to, for the sake of proving something. I'm also like when people who like, I have multiple family and friends who aren't religiously observant in almost any way, who give something up for Lent. And I'm like, why? And it's really almost like it's like they chose a random month to like for self-deprivation or something.
Yeah. I always call that sort of like New Year's resolution redux, like because it comes usually right at the point of the year where like you maybe made these New Year's resolutions and by the middle of February, you kind of quote unquote messed up or whatever. And so you're like, I'm going to recommit to this thing.
Yeah. Yep. You just made me think about why would you have Lent? Like, why deal with Lent if you're not a Jesus person? It's sort of like when I wake up early in the morning, like on a day, like a normal, back in the day when we had normal lives our lives were never normal as priests, but a normal Sunday for us would mean waking up early on a Sunday, super anxious about the day, excited and happy, but super anxious about the day, and heading to church, oftentimes still in the dark. And I'd see people either out running or like in line at the coffee shop. And I'd be like, why would anyone get up this early if Jesus wasn't making them? Like, Jesus is forcing me to wake up this early on a Sunday. What's your excuse? This is absurd.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, when we have like the 8 a.m. service, when it's during the winter, it's like dead of winter, it's dark when we start the service. I'm like, we're awake before God. Like, this is absurd. Why would we do that? I can't imagine. It was like going to a Unitarian. I remember I used to go to my dad's Unitarian church, and I was like, why are all these people here? They don't even have to be. They don't believe this thing. What's it? That was rude. It's how I felt at the time. Speaking of different kinds of experiences of worship, we got into a good conversation, I thought, last week about high church versus low church.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of that conversation, someone asked a question about social matters.
Yeah.
And do high church or Anglo-Catholic types where do they tend to fall in the justice conversation around social issues?
Yeah. And there was a kind of question
and
about
evangelical,
like
same thing.
ordination of women and
That's right. That's right.
Things like that.
And I guess we wanted to talk a little bit about that today. And I have a couple of thoughts, but I've been monologuing quite a bit today. So I would love to see what your like initial thoughts of that are.
Yeah. It's interesting because there are sort of cultural issues at play in that kind of like high church, low church, Anglo-Catholic, evangelical conversation that I haven't always been very aware of or attuned to.
Right.
Until I've kind of looked around and been like, oh, there are no women here.
Right.
Or there's this kind of weird dynamic, particularly in Anglo-Catholic parishes, where they are very open and accepting of like cis gay white men.
Yep.
But not of women or so there's this kind of bizarre dynamic, because you'd think like, oh, well, if you're accepting of like gay men, then of course you'd be accepting of women. But there is a dynamic,
not always.
There is a dynamic in which some Anglo-Catholic parishes can be pretty misogynistic spaces.
Yep.
Again, not always. That's not, every place.
Hashtag not every Anglo-Catholic church.
Yeah. Well, and there's a group called the like Society of Catholic Priests that's predominantly like Anglo-Catholic clergy. And at one point I was like kind of looking through the stuff and I was like, oh, like I like hold to all these kind of tenets. And then I looked at a picture of the group and I was like, oh, it's all men wearing cassocks in
this pose.
In that pose. And I was like, oh, I'm not welcome here. Like, this is not a space for me.
I'm trying to come up with a Beretta. I'm trying to make a Beretta out of face masks here. I can't do it. It's not going to happen. Just like this.
So like that's one kind of dynamic that is sometimes at play that you might not, I don't know, anticipate, or even again, like it wasn't kind of known to me. I don't know. What else? Well,
I mean, I would say that dynamic is there. I think you do see, okay, so Anglo-Catholics, I was just thinking about this before we got on. Anglo-Catholics within the church tend to be comfortable with being odd. They tend to be comfortable with not fitting in perfectly, is what I actually mean. And because of that, they tend to be comfortable being rabble rousers when it comes to political issues and social issues. So some of the most outspoken, socially outspoken voices in the church, in the Episcopal Church that I know of, are people who are Anglo-Catholic. They already know that they're at odds with both Episcopalians and American culture by like believing so fervently in the power of mystical worship and God's bodily presence in the Eucharist, that they know that puts them at odds with just a good number of people, and that the way that they experience the glory of God in the worship and Anglo-Catholic worship is so so otherworldly, so out there. They know all that. And so they're not afraid oftentimes to speak truth to power. And when they get big into justice, I mean, I know some very politically progressive Anglo-Catholics, and we are seeing a rise, I think, in female Anglo-Catholics and Anglo-Catholics that sort of break that divide that you were describing, that I have also seen. And yet it doesn't quite always fit the mold of what we would call conservative or liberal. There is a really strong pro-life movement within Anglo-Catholicism, and but a pro-life movement that is pro-life, that is anti-war, anti-capital punishment, pro-socialized, social net, safety nets, and so a more robust understanding of pro-life than simply about what you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, which would be, essentially a pro-birth or abortion control.
Definitely part of that kind of like whole life ethic of like supporting flourishing from.
So is that conservative or liberal?
Right.
And people would say, well, it's conservative because, and I asked the question on Facebook, I like to ask a question on Facebook. About 3 or 4 years ago, I asked the question, can someone be a feminist and be pro-life? And the vast majority of responses I got from progressive clergy was, no, it's impossible. Oh, okay. And so I had some female friends that are Anglo-Catholic that responded to me privately. I'm a feminist who's pro-life, but, where do I say that? And so I know that's an example of a space where it doesn't match up with.
It doesn't map on to like
our normal left-right continuum. Right? Now, I would say the same can be true about evangelical low church Episcopalians as well. That they also they grew up oftentimes in denominations or in churches that said, we're not of this world. We're in the world, but not of it. And that they were taught that Christianity was counter to a culture. And so they will oftentimes break away from their tradition. You'll see a lot with evangelical Christianity, the push for housing and feeding the homeless, feeding the hungry and housing people who are experiencing homelessness. You will see that movement within evangelical Christians and evangelical Episcopalians. And so again, where does that fall? Is that conservative or liberal by our definitions? Right. I would say in both cases, when you go down low church or high church, you have, don't worry, there's plenty of misogyny in both places. So when we were talking specifically around the ordination of women, that was not primarily either a low church or a high church movement.
Yeah.
Right. If anything, it was that lovely, lukewarm, broad church. Am I right? I think.
Yeah. And also like there's this, I don't know where I was going to go with this, but I also want to bring out like the kind of the Anglo-Catholic move or the kind of like Oxford movement move within the Anglican Church.
Yeah.
That sacramentality really translated into a lot of social justice commitments because like, it wasn't just the bread and the wine that was sacramental. It was the world around us.
Yes.
And so if we view if we, take the incarnation seriously and we take, kind of the divinity of the world around us seriously, then what does that mean in terms of how we care for it? How do we care for each other? How do we care for people that are vulnerable? How do we care for, the ecology? Does that mean we exploit it past the limits of like what the earth can take? Or, do we just throw an old sandwich at somebody who is on the street? Like I think in both cases, what I find very lovely and very powerful is that our theological commitments are not in a void, and they don't stay on Sundays. They're not just, it's not 1 hour on Sundays that we believe these things. Eventually they should bleed into the rest of our lives and the decisions that we make.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and so that's like, there's a British, he might've been, when he was a theologian, I don't know if he was a bishop or not, but F.D. Morris, who wrote in the last century, its last name looks like it's written Maurice, but it's pronounced F.D. Morris. And he was, literally that's what he talked about was his Anglo-Catholic view, drawing him into the world more deeply for the purpose of loving and honoring his neighbor in real and practical ways, which required social change and the recognition of Christ as a sacramental reality, that Christ is the foremost sort of example of an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace embodied in humanity. And through Christ, we all are able to see the world as a sacramental world, a world where God is pleased to dwell in all sorts of places. And if that's the case, how do we honor it? That's the kind of Anglo-Catholic I am, if I am one at all. Like that, when I get there, I'm like, yes, give me that. Give me that. Give me that. Give me that. That makes sense to me. Don't know how it translates to Berettas, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah, there's a lovely quote, and it's one of the early church fathers, I believe, who said it, that was something along the lines of like, if you don't see Christ in your neighbor, like you're not going to get Christ in the bread and the wine. Like those two are, I butchered that quote entirely, and I'd have to look it up but not
entirely.
But the relationship between the two of Christ being present, very real presence in the sacrament and real presence in one another.
Right.
That those two are inextricable.
That's right. Totally. And you didn't butcher it because you got the point across, and that's exactly the thing. That's exactly the thing. Like if I think I can love God without loving my neighbor, I do not understand what love is. And I don't understand who God is.
Yeah.
At all. Right? Like you don't get God if you think that you can love God without loving your neighbor. It doesn't work. And so I love that. So would you say, I don't know, would you say that I don't know if I like as a woman in the Episcopal Church who's a priest, it sounds like there's no one specific group or area wherein you automatically feel safe, but also not necessarily one particular group or area where you automatically feel like, in terms of high church, low church, evangelical, Anglo-Catholic, broad church, where you feel either inherently safe or inherently, maybe you do always feel inherently like having to prove that you belong. I don't know. What's
I'd say I'm always sort of inherently suspicious. Like, like I'm always trying to read the room. I'm always trying to read people, and kind of, especially other clerics or bishops or whomever. And some of those readings are like, unfortunately, this leads to some sort of judgments maybe about people. Like, where did you go to seminary? Where
a seminary that allows women?
Yeah, or that allows women to serve at the altar. Like, if you went to one that doesn't, I'm probably going to be a little like on guard.
Yep.
Until I get a little bit more of a like, yeah, you're cool with me,
right,
vibe. I think less and less. One of the odd things about the church is that when I'm in a lot of like kind of clergy women online groups, I have a lot of clergy women friends. I, talk to a lot of clergy women, and then I go to like diocesan things and I'm like, where are the women?
I know they're online. They exist. Am I talking to some guy right now? What is this? Am I being catfished in this group?
Like, I kind of made a joke one time at diocesan convention. There were a bunch of my like male clergy friends who had just kind of circled up and were eating lunch together. And I kind of came up and I was like, oh, hey, are like girls allowed in this club? And I think they got really offended.
Then be less of a sausage fest, dudes. Like, get it together.
Not my intention.
Like, actually figure out how to incorporate women into your life.
Yeah. But yeah, I know there for a while, obviously before the pandemic, we had a kind of diocesan-wide clergy women lunch like once a quarter, just to kind of get together and support each other. And a lot of the women in that group had been clergy women for a long time, back when there were, 3 or 4 clergy women in my diocese.
Yep.
And now there are quite a bit more. And I remember one of the male clerics was kind of hearing about this, and he was like, well, why can't we have like a male clergy lunch? And it was like, well, you can, and you can put it together. But also, like, this has been a all male space for so long. Like, do you not understand the need for us to have this like space together?
As a guy who used to think like that, I have very little patience for guys who think like that. And that's which is my own judgment, and it's also my own shame, right? But I always, if someone was like, well, there's Black History Month, and I was like, oh, well, why just Black history? Like, what, like, I was that guy. I was that guy. I'm not that guy now, but I was. I know the mentality of defensiveness. It comes from defensiveness, and it becomes from fear. It comes from fear of all sorts of things. A lot of it's unnamed fear, because naming it is dangerous, right? It's why you've probably read this thing where if someone tells a racist joke or a sexist joke, and then you just literally go, why is that funny?
Yeah. And
then they're like, well, come on, it's just funny. No, explain it to me. Explain the part that's funny. And I did that. I've done that once with someone, publicly, where I said, explain to me why why you would say that, instead of just dismissing it. Mm-hmm. And then when they try to explain, you learn a lot, but you also expose the reality that this is coming from a place that's not healthy.
Yeah.
Like, you want an all male clergy group? That's every clergy group for the first 1970 years of the church. Actually, not the first few years when there were female deacons and there were women leading churches, but once it got established after, so after the first 100 years, from from the beginning of the 2nd century till around 1974, you had this to yourself. So get over it. And yeah, dominant groups don't need that the same way that marginalized groups do.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I saw this thread the other day on Twitter from a writer that I follow who covers endurance sports and she writes for Triathlete magazine. Yeah. And one of the things that she does is she does kind of a club focus of like this particular club, and it's, sometimes it's a women's triathlon club, and sometimes it's a disabled triathlons club, triathlete club, or whatever it was. And she's never gotten any like pushback on that until most recently she wrote about a Black triathlon club. And all of a sudden she got a bunch of pushback, like, why make this about race? Why does everything have to be about race and separating and blah, blah, blah? And it's like, you guys, triathlon is an incredibly white, incredibly upper middle class sport. Right. And to think like, oh, maybe people who don't feel comfortable in the broader triathlon world might need a group of other people that like look like them and have the same kind of experience. Right. Like, why is that? It's not a bad thing when it's women. It's not a bad thing when it's disabled triathletes or other, whatever. But all of a sudden, if it's a Black triathlon group, it's about race, or it's about, well, and it's, that's why I said, I think it's fear. And Lisa asked the question, is it fear of what? Fear of losing dominance? Maybe not consciously. I think there's a fear of acknowledging our own guilt. Mm.
So white innocence is really important to white people. It's a real, and to men, when the moment that a man gets accused of doing something, my first thought is like, I'm not like that. That I'm afraid of being thrown into a category. And so you have hashtag not all men. Well, okay, fine, but a lot of them, right? Like, and so you got to do this work of like examining your own fear, your own guilt, your own shame, or your own suspicions. All of that I do as a man, as all of the areas of privilege I check off most of those boxes. If only I was 6'1". I'm very short and bald, but other than that, I fit all of the categories of like white, male, cis, straight, the whole bit. And like, I've had to take a step back and look and go like, where am I being defensive and why? And what would it like, what do I, and I mean, one of the things that was really, really helpful for me, yes, Leslie says enough men that our default response is fear for our safety. The thing I was just about to say, Leslie, is I remember reading a thread a few years back where a woman asked on Twitter, what would you do? What would you do if men had if all men had a curfew and women didn't? And women were like, oh, run with headphones on at night. And like, they just had the women just went wild and like beautifully wild, like the best sense of the word, like, oh my gosh, all the things, dreaming of all the things they would do if they could be out and about in the world and men couldn't. And none of them, not one of them was mean, like, oh, good. None of them, they were all like how liberated they would feel and free and safe. And I remember reading that and just being like, not like, what's wrong with these women? I remember reading that and being like, oh, okay. Oh, like, I don't freaking know. Right? I don't know what it's like. And so I kind of like, I try to go through these conversations with like a modicum of well, anytime a man tries to say they're trying to be humble, it never comes off right. So humility might not be the thing, but like some sense of like
awareness
that I don't know things.
Yeah.
And that I'm wrong a lot.
I think another part of it is that, especially for white men, like every space has always been open to them.
Yes.
And so for a group to say, actually, this space isn't for you,
right.
is like, what do you mean this space isn't for me? Every space is for me.
Right.
And it's this kind of insult. It's not intended as an insult. It's intended as like a safe space. But right. I think that's part of it too, of like, until you realize what the sort of default is, like, then of course you don't realize why we need a Black History Month or right. why we need the National Museum of African American Music just opened right. here in Nashville. Like, what do you mean? Why do we need that? It's all music, right? Like, why do we have to tell this story? But like,
because it's never been told and you haven't listened to it. Because you've refused to listen to the stories. That, not you, obviously, but that's the point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know that 40% of cowboys were Black?
No.
How would you?
Right.
Because they made one cowboy movie with one Black guy and everyone's like, oh, the Black cowboy movie. 40%? That's almost every other cowboy. Where's that movie?
Yeah.
Like but if you did it, oh, well, that's that movie about that thing. What's the story you're trying to tell? The story of 40% of cowboys. Yeah. It didn't look like Kevin Costner.
Mm-hmm. Or John Wayne or whatever.
Right, or John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. Oh my gosh, it turns out. At least Clint Eastwood put Morgan Freeman in one. At least get it started. My God, but you don't see it. It's not even there any of the time. It's so weird. I was gonna say something else about that. Oh well. I got all worked up.
Yeah. But we are coming up on our hour.
I know, you're right. So. I'm still going to try to think of what it was. Oh, well, sorry.
No, it's okay.
There's so much there in terms of like what we have to do and we didn't connect it explicitly to Jesus, but I want to do that because to me it is very much connected to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Charlie Brumbaugh's. So Charlie Brumbaugh is here. Hey, Phil and Kira, I'm in town briefly. I figured that YouTube would work better at closer range, but I forgot you were on Eastern time and I'm still on Mountain time. Well, Charlie, you can join later on. You can watch it later on, the recording. And I want to welcome you. I want you to know we were talking about you earlier, though I didn't use your name. Kira and I were talking about how churches prepare people for death. Charlie was the guy who put together all the stuff at Redeemer so that people would be appropriately ready to meet their makers.
Oh, well, great. Good on you, Charlie, because
He's
that
done
is
good work.
very important work.
He's done good work in the name of death, and we're really grateful for that. Genuinely grateful. And Charlie, if you got the time and you want to put a mask on and hang out in my backyard, I wouldn't hate it. I'll tell you that right now. If you're in town, if you're in the Queen City, the nasty natty. Kira, what have you been listening to this week?
So I belatedly, so this kind of ties into what we were talking about. Belatedly started the PBS Black Church documentary, which is available on YouTube. The Henry Louis Gates Black Church, story of the Black Church. And then like the music was so inspiring to me that I ended up turning to the Kirk Franklin Tiny Desk concert from NPR. Right. And then have kind of been on like a Kirk Franklin kick.
Don't know Kirk Franklin at all.
Which it's not like my usual vibe, but he's such an important figure in kind of the Black gospel, Black religious music scene. And it's very uplifting. So if you are having like a bad day and you kind of want to like reconnect with Jesus and with kind of something uplifting, pump that Kirk Franklin.
I'm checking him out. I just found This Is Kirk Franklin on Spotify, and we're gonna get together and make it happen.
He's also like, I listened to this really interesting NPR interview with him like a while ago, several years ago, and he was not immediately accepted into kind of the Black church music scene because he draws so heavily from like hip hop and rap and sort of more like secular music forms.
Right.
So he was in this kind of weird space where he was incredibly popular and incredibly well known, but also not accepted into this kind of church music.
Yeah.
Or there was a whole conversation about like what is church music and can it draw?
That's an ongoing like more than century old conversation within the Black church. If you played the blues, for instance, you played the blues or gospel, you didn't play both. So even if a song had the blues rhythm, you couldn't like. So there's a guy named Gary Davis who was a Baptist preacher, Reverend Gary Davis, who said like he was saved, so he stopped doing blues and only did gospel. He was playing blues music, obviously.
Yeah.
But he sang only about religious themes because he didn't do blues anymore. And when he would throw in a blues song like Cocaine Blues or something like that, Spoonful, people would be like, what's he doing? You know what I mean? Like, this is crazy, but that's totally the case. I've listened to Nirvana, their album Nevermind in its entirety this morning, very, very loudly because I was composing a letter, and I listened to rock and roll really loud when I'm writing.
Yeah.
I needed to be fast. I needed to be like loud, but I don't want it to be like not like I don't know, like speed metal or something like that, or death metal, but like White Stripes or Nirvana or something like that just like pushes. I need to
like
listen to
rhythmic.
Keeps me going. Absolutely. Oh man, when I was running to the White Stripes was awesome.
Yeah.
And then there's did I tell you about this German singer, Sybil Bayer?
I'm
going to show you how it's pronounced in this, and I'm going to put it in the chat because it's pronounced or it's spelled all funky.
Is it like
that?
AIER or something?
Yeah, and her first name is spelled weird. She's got one album out. She put out an album of demos in like the 60s and then bailed. There's a couple of women like that I found, like this, like Connie Converse and a couple others. Mm-hmm. So apparently that's my new genre. But there's one song of hers I want you to look up called Forget About.
Forget About.
I can listen to this song. I'm like the guy who will listen to a song 10 times in a row. This is one of those songs I could listen to 10 times in a row. This is my jam this week. So welcome to that.
Cool.
All right. Well, as usual, we've gone to 12:05.
It's great to be with you all this morning and great to be with you, Phil. Good conversation, as always.
Can we talk next week, even though no one's asked us to? I mean, we should open up to questions because we didn't get a lot of questions this week. And so we can remind people earlier next week.
Yeah.
But I also like if there's time or if we, I don't know, I'd love for us to talk more about sort of like when we talk about the things we just talked about in terms of racial and gender awareness and presence and representation and making space for and all of those things. Like we didn't specifically explicitly say because Jesus says, but I genuinely, my discipleship to Jesus has been a huge driver for me to open my mind towards this and to think differently about it. And I'd love if you and I could talk a little bit next week about how this is a gospel imperative and not just an ideological or political stance, but a gospel imperative.
Right. A like social justice-y kind of
right. Because I just
political.
Right. Like I literally, someone recently was like, I know that you're progressive to me. And I was like, I don't know that. So why do you know that? But like, I know that I'm trying to follow Jesus and that has led me down certain paths. And so I'd love for us to talk a little bit about how Jesus inspires you and I in our understanding of how we approach gender and sexuality and racial issues in our church and in our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
We'll be here.
Leslie, Lisa, Betsy, Charlie. Kathy's with us as well. And anyone else who's joined us or will watch us later, hats off to you. Always an absolute joy to be with you all. Kira, anything else you want to say?
No, but I think I told you last week or a few weeks ago that I was going to get a Cincinnati Reds cap so that we could be twins.
Twinsies. Anytime you want to. I just think it's just too much skin. I don't like to show too much skin. The Bible says to dress modestly.
Also, the lighting is a little.
The lighting is really bad in my office. I don't know how to fix this, you guys. I have a good camera. Kira and I have the same camera, and she looks fantastic, and I look like this. And my coloring is better in real life. I'm not like the pale horse, and the man who sat on him was death. Like that's not what this is, right? So I wear the hat, and it sort of at least calms things down a little bit. But when you don't need a hat.
Yeah.
No, you're great. All right. Kira, you rock.
Great to be with you.